What's up, everybody? Been a long time. I couldn't stand by any longer, though, with all this exciting stuff happening. The highly anticipated Godzilla Minus One opens in theaters all across America this week. Certainly cannot wait for that. Monarch is in mid swing on Apple TV, and we creep ever closer to Godzilla vs. Kong New Empire, which is currently scheduled for April 2024. Expect a trailer to drop for that probably any day now. So I'm staying up really late to get this video out because I've been asked on multiple occasions if I could do a video based on my rankings of the existing Godzilla films out today, as of now. And I figure I better probably get this list going before Minus One opens, at least for the fan event. It opens tomorrow. So I'd really like to get this out. And before I get into the list itself, just a couple kind of a requirements and explanation of what this list consists of. So this is my list of my favorite full-length Godzilla movies. So what that means is only full-length feature films will be included on this list. So none of the shows, animated or live action, or the short films that have been coming out in recent years, though those are admittedly all pretty awesome, but I have to say, to be fair, they don't have to worry about a plot at all. So, it's not as difficult. Also, it should go without saying, but this list only includes the movies where Godzilla is the central character or attraction. So movies that might share the same continuity, like Mothra or Rodan 56 or Kong Skull Island, are not part of this, nor are movies where Godzilla might show up as like a brief cameo. Finally, this is obviously my opinion, my list, my favorites. I encourage everybody to chime in the comment section, but keep in mind, I know everybody has polarizing preferences and what they are looking for in their kaiju films. Hell, I mean, I just had an interaction with somebody who said that he thinks that human plots in Godzilla movies are a complete waste of time and like nobody cares. So he doesn't like the films that place an emphasis on character building. Now, with me having a contrasting attitude, I thought that was kind of a pretty shitty take, honestly, but it further proves to the point, Godzilla provides something differently to everybody. So with all that being said, let's get this list rolling. First on the list, or well, technically last place, is going to be number 36, Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. I really don't remember a thing about this movie. I watched it once. I feel like I was bored through pretty much the entirety of it. Bonus points to them for murking one of Godzilla's most beloved villains into being literally nothing. Then number 35, I have Godzilla the Planet Eater. As you can see, I'm really not a huge fan of the anime trilogy that was on Netflix. But while it is better than its predecessor, the end to the anime trilogy pretty much cemented that we didn't need any more of the story told. The climax was certainly decent enough, but it sure felt like it took forever to get there, and at least this time, Ghidorah, for as different and weird as he was an actual threat. So, I mean, there is that. All right, let's keep going. Number 34, Godzilla 1998. Let's get this out of the way. Aside from a few cool scenes early on, this movie feels every bit like a film that was made with zero respect for the source material. And that was confirmed by both the director and the producer. I know my opinion on this is going to ruffle some feathers, but aside from like neat moments like the attack on the Japanese fishing boat and the first landing in New York City, it's pretty much lazy writing, force acting, and a climax that serves best as a cheap Jurassic Park ripoff, culminating in one of the most unsatisfactory end sequences in any Godzilla film. But if this list was most important Godzilla movies, it would rank higher, mostly due to the amazing marketing campaign that was associated with this and introducing new audiences to the iconic monster. Number 33 for me is Godzilla's Revenge. A few things bother me about this movie. First, none of the kaiju scenes in this movie actually happen, as everything in the film takes place in some kid's imagination. Second, as if Gabbard didn't already have such a punchable looking face right out of the gate, he has got to have one of the most annoying roars you'll ever hear. I understand that's not by accident, but still, just painfully annoying. Definitely one of my least favorite villains in a Godzilla movie. And then finally, the little protagonist, he clearly learns the wrong lesson after all, right? Because he finally decides to stand up to his own bullies. And then what does he do right after that? He basically becomes one. He became what he hated most. He like knocked the poor painting guy off the ladder, made him spill the paint all over himself, ran away laughing, and then became friends with the bullies that were chasing him the entire movie. That's some of the worst character growth I've ever seen in a movie. Next, I have Godzilla versus Megalon. Another one that's probably going to be a little controversial, but I mean, hey, something had to come next on this list. And I know this is a classic kaiju film, beloved by many who have a very nostalgic feeling for this one. I can't help it. I find this one too far on the hokey side of the Showa series for the reasons that I'm not really a fan of. I don't like the child lead character. I actually don't really like when kids are the lead characters in any of the movies I really watch. And the Seatopians, they're just like, kind of laughable. They're silly. Megalon looks cool. He looks cool, but that's about it. And then Gigan, I mean, come on, how do you mess up Gigan? He looked awful. He looked like he belonged on an episode of Botched. And then this has got to be, to me, one of the ugliest Godzilla designs of all time, which is really saying something because I'm pretty sure they were trying to make him cute. This is probably one of the films where I feel like Toho put it out and they were kind of like, yeah, we don't really give a shit. All right, 31, Godzilla versus Space Godzilla. Uh, at this time, Toho was desperate to sell tickets. They figured they would try to target women this go around, a little more. And, to me, Godzilla, like the once proud king of the monsters, especially the way he started off in this Heisei series, he's presented here as like a misunderstood, victimized circus animal kind of thing that needs to be left alone to raise his adopted son in peace. Even like an awesomely sadistic villain like Space Godzilla can't really save this film from feeling like a Lifetime movie with kaiju in it. Just also felt like it's a really boring movie through most of it. So, not a fan of Godzilla versus Space Godzilla, but Space Godzilla himself, fucking awesome. Number 30 comes Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, and I almost forgot this one. Well, we can finally put the anime trilogy behind us with this one, though. In concept, I really like what they were going for here. I wish they spent more time showing the events that led to the events in this movie. It's more interesting than, the human characters floating around in space for 90% of it, right? A little bit of a boost for a great cliffhanger at the end, though. The first time I watched this, I definitely didn't see that coming. Some really dark elements are glossed over that I think would have been interesting to see on screen. Number 29, Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. The low point of the Millennium series, in my honest opinion. This movie has a bland, direct-to-TV feel all over it. The characters are all around forgettable. Way too much of a reliance on horrible CGI. This is another example of a kid protagonist ruining the plot. This one is responsible for the brutal deaths of God knows how many people because he couldn't listen to adults. But Megaguirus and her hive are not a terrible addition to the Toho pantheon of monsters. Well, even though the Mega Nula and all those things existed from Rodan and back in 1956, but Megaguirus is cool. Number 28, Godzilla Raids Again. Going back all the way to 1955 for this one, the second ever Godzilla film made. Definitely a far drop off in quality compared to its predecessor. I do think the hate for this movie can be a little strong. The original Japanese version of it is significantly better than the American version that many of us grew up watching. It is still somewhat lacking from a character standpoint, and you could tell the production was rushed. But there is some very creepy imagery that kind of stands out in my head, makes it more memorable. We got our first on-screen kaiju battle in the Godzilla series, and Anguirus will go on to become an extremely popular creation and a fan favorite to this day. Next, number 27 is 1993's Godzilla vs. Mothra. This one pretty much belongs at the bottom of the Heisei series with Space Godzilla. Much like the 1964 classic, corporate greed is at the heart of the story, and Mothra will try to stop a rampaging Godzilla once again. But this time, Batra's involved, and he's kind of like the yang to Mothra's yin, right? So it's actually Godzilla who feels like he serves no purpose in this movie, mainly just being used as a reason to unite the two flying monsters to putting aside their differences. Couple that with some less than gripping acting and some laughable wannabe Indiana Jones action scenes. It definitely is one of the more forgettable films. Number 26 will be Godzilla x Mechagodzilla. A really cool take on Mechagodzilla being built, using the bones of the 1954 Godzilla. Though the budget of the film rarely take this brilliant concept to the levels it should be at. but still a cool twist, nonetheless. However, as cool as Kiru is, this Godzilla lacks any sort of personality or resonance. Like, half the time, he looks like an empty suit just getting hit with pyrotechnics, because let's face it, he probably was. He gets completely overshadowed by Kiru in his own movie. I will say the human cast is pretty solid in this movie, doing a lot of the legwork themselves to make things somewhat interesting, but just can't really justify this movie being higher on the list. Number 25 is a sequel to the last movie, Godzilla Tokyo SOS. This feels pretty even with it as well, in my opinion. This one boasts some bigger special effects, but I do prefer the characters in the last one. SOS tries to elevate itself on Easter eggs, and by linking this film as a sequel to the original Mothra in 1961. But Mothra does steal the show in this, hands down, and she looks amazing here. The final battle is impressive, and Godzilla is a little more redeemable as a true threat this time. Now, number 24, Son of Godzilla. From a character driven standpoint, Son of Godzilla might be one of the better films in the series. The humans are interesting, likable, and they have a strong impact on the flow of the plot. The island is a unique setting, the mutated insects all look great. Kamunga, especially, is a pretty terrifying creature and gross. And at its heart is a parenting story, with Godzilla trying to teach his ugly kid Manila how to survive and defend himself while ultimately revealing that he is truly a caring protector. Unfortunately, even as a parent of a toddler, I find Minya annoying as fuck, and rarely am I ever in the mood to watch a movie about Godzilla trying to take a nap while his son makes a mess of everything, because that's a story of my own life. 23, Godzilla vs. Hedorah. One of the more bizarre Godzilla films out there. This one is hit or miss among the fans. First off, Hedorah is an awesome kaiju, both succeeding in concept and in the practical sense as well. It looks great and is very formidable. Second of all, the cast is pretty strong. Even Ken, whom I have to say is far more competent than all the other child characters in almost all the other movies. It's really dark, surprisingly graphic for a 70s Showa film, and the theme of environmental responsibility is definitely as important now as it was back then. Still, I can see why it may not be everyone's cup of tea, and it definitely made me miss Akira Ifukube score. The music on this is when you don't have Ifukube composing music, it just doesn't really feel like a Godzilla movie to me. 22, Godzilla Final Wars. This was the 50th anniversary film. This is a case when expectations play a major role on a film's impact on the audience. The rumored synopsis of what the film for Godzilla's landmark achievement was going to be about sounded more serious in nature compared to what we actually got. Directed by Rue Kitamura, it was easy to have big hopes for this one, but instead we kind of got like this arcade-style film with Godzilla just blasting through almost all his opponents, very Mortal Kombat style. And the plot was nothing to take too seriously, and the characters were written like a 90s Saturday morning cartoon. Combine this with the heavy-handed Matrix meets X-Men inspiration, it's really easy to see why the fans are so split on it. Don Fry is like the lead actor in it, and he basically is as good as you would expect Don Fry to be. But people do love this movie for its over-the-top ridiculousness, so that says something. And it is enjoyable if you let it be, although it is also really nice to see the ensemble of monsters from like the Showa series, at least in like a tribute fashion like this. Number 21 goes to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 93. This movie suffers from like peaks and valleys, but I do enjoy more about it than things I do not. This movie has really awesome monster battles starting immediately with Godzilla vs. Rodan scene that is high up on my personal list of favorites. And the final sequence of Rodan sacrificing itself to rejuvenate Godzilla, to finally seeing Godzilla just obliterating Mechagodzilla, is extremely satisfying. We are introduced to a baby Godzilla that we don't have to hate, and Akira Ifukube delivers one of the greatest new pieces of music up until that time in the series. The human characters don't really bring much to the table. The pterodactyl guy is like an unwatchable doofus through most of it. But while Mechagodzilla here is formidable, he doesn't really match the presence of his Showa predecessor. Number 20, Godzilla 2000 Millennium. This is Toho's impromptu response to the 1998 American Godzilla film. They really got into damage control pretty quickly by reintroducing a brand new badass Japanese Godzilla, and for the most part, this movie is plagued with mediocrity for about 70% of the runtime. The story drags a bit, and the human protagonists aren't particularly memorable, But the movie is end capped by both a really cool start and an even stronger ending, perhaps closing on one of the greatest end shots in the franchise's history. Also, Orga was a really interesting monster, just was not in it nearly enough. 19, for me, Ebra Horror the Deep, one of the more outlandish and strange Godzilla films, partly because this was supposed to be a King Kong movie instead, but due to some rights or trademark issues, it ended up being Godzilla in the film. Akira Takarada delivers another great performance. The human cast makes this movie, in my opinion. They're excellent. They have great chemistry with each other. While not a challenge in any real sense against Godzilla, Ebra is a pretty cool kaiju and looks extremely realistic for its time while serving as an ever lurking threat to really our human protagonists, who are more boots on the ground. We also get a dusty looking Mothra prop to accompany the strung out looking Godzilla suit, but it all kind of comes together kind of nicely. This is one of the few instances where I watch a Godzilla film more so for the humans than the monsters, but seeing Godzilla come out of that mountain is still a really great scene. All right, the MonsterVerse premieres at number 18, Godzilla vs. Kong. This is the movie that saved Hollywood from the pandemic, or at least helped a whole lot. This is one of those turn off your brain and just enjoy the ride films. As long as you've come to see some iconic monster versus monster action, you should feel pretty satisfied. Everything that really works for this movie can be summed up in three scenes: the battle at sea, which was visually so impressive, the Hong Kong battle, and then the inevitable team up at the end. Everything else is entirely skippable, especially the Team Godzilla scenes. And while that sounds like a terrible thing to say for a 2 hour film, when the movie does find its footing, it really is awesome to see how far these two world famous monsters have come. Number 17 is a guilty pleasure of mine. I can't justify this movie being high up on this list other than something about it is just always entertaining to me. It was also the third Godzilla movie I ever owned, so maybe that had something to do with it. But the soundtrack here slaps. I mean, even though a lot of music is just borrowed from other classic Toho films, it's it's great. Gigan is an amazing addition to the series. The humans are like supporting characters in an anime, but in this case, I think it works out. And the climactic battle is equal parts over the top campy and yet also brutal. And as far as filling out a roster, you could do far worse than adding King Ghidorah and Anguirus to your movie. And finally, what's not to love about alien cockroaches walking around in human skin? Number 16, The Return of Godzilla. After a 10-year hiatus, Godzilla returns and kicks off the new Heisei series in dramatic fashion. I think it was time we needed a modern version of the terrorizing side of Godzilla. And for the most part, we got it here, though some of the sequels do it a bit better. The first half of the movie is really suspenseful, and it does tend to drag a little bit in the second half. Like that helicopter rescue scene, I feel like it takes like 20 minutes by itself. And Godzilla, for this time, compared to what we had before, he looks pretty great here, mostly. And the score is pretty badass, though I do prefer the American version of this film, where it's called Godzilla 1985. Bringing Raymond Burr back was a great touch. I really like the ending of this film that includes him. And now we're getting into the top 15. Next, we got Godzilla 2014, arguably the best made MonsterVerse movie from an objective standpoint. I both love and am also let down somewhat by Godzilla 2014. It's a proper Godzilla crafted with respect by Hollywood, and Bryan Cranston is incredible in it for the short amount of time that he has. The monster fight scenes are all so well done, and the tone and imagery of this film, focusing on the sheer size of the kaiju and the hopelessness of the military to stop them, really drive home the magnitude of what's on screen. My complaints, while from strictly a personal standpoint, really make some of it hard to digest. First, the movie was marketed as a far grittier story featuring a world destroyer Godzilla that was implied to be the culprit of the mass destruction that we saw in the original teaser. A movie that I was highly looking forward to, but I didn't get that. And as alluded to earlier, Bryan Cranston was just off way too early. Coming in at number 14, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. And much like how Godzilla vs. Mothra was ripping off Indiana Jones, 1991's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah picked another recent Hollywood blockbuster to borrow from. This time it was James Cameron's Terminator. And if aliens were the sci-fi standard in the films of the 60s and 70s, artificial intelligence and time travel were probably the next best thing. After Godzilla vs. Biollante sort of disappointed at the box office, Toho thought bringing back another classic kaiju would help get the series back on track, which it did succeed in doing, at least from a office standpoint. But with a pretty outlandish plot full of really cheesy effects, I'm hard pressed to call this a good film objectively. But as far as fan service goes, it all does pay off when a new and even more intimidating Godzilla appears and confronts King Ghidorah. I think this is a movie that, as long as you've seen it at a relatively younger age and can look beyond its obvious flaws, then it ages well, at least in charm, if nothing else. Coming in 13, The Terror of Mechagodzilla. The end of the Showa era ended on a high note with two back to back strong Godzilla films featuring one of his deadliest and most popular enemies. I do slightly prefer the 1974 film, but Terror of Mechagodzilla is a pleasure to watch at any time. The characters are all interesting. The storyline is a little more creative than a lot of the other films, a little darker in nature, which I appreciate. They didn't pull any punches with the monsters or the special effects. And spearheaded by a strong cast and stellar monster action, it felt like a very solid last call for Godzilla at the time. The new monster, Titanosaurus, is a hit with fans, especially outside of Japan. Has a cool tragic story of his own, though he also does have one of the more obnoxious roars in the series as well. Number 12, Destroy All Monsters. Another example of Toho saying this was going to be the last Godzilla movie and then obviously not committing to that. This film adds a little confusion to the timeline because it jumps the plot forward to the year 1999 while being made in 1968. It feels like a culmination of like the science fiction era at the time with aliens trying to take over the planet by controlling all the monsters and unleashing them in various big cities all across the globe. It seems like things just keep getting worse for the human protagonists, which makes the eventual payoff more satisfying when the monsters are finally freed of their mind control. The alien antagonist, the leader of the Kilak group on Earth, they're so arrogant and kind of pompous that you get the chills when Godzilla himself is the one to catch on to their crap and brings their little caves crumbling down on top of them. And despite the title alluding to the death of all the monsters, it's not at all the case. Things aren't better for King Ghidorah, however, as he is the champion that these aliens chose to fight on their behalf, and he just gets straight up gangbanged by all of the Earth monsters. The results are even uglier than anticipated as King Ghidorah gets curb stomped into oblivion in a battle that is way more brutally one-sided than exciting. With number 11, this is the OG classic King Kong vs. Godzilla. Unlike today, back in 1962, Godzilla was just a brand new monster on the block. He was still in his humble beginnings, and he was in the shadow of the great King Kong, who was around since 1933. There are plenty of videos about this movie and all the behind the scenes like shenanigans and bullshit that had to happen to get this movie made. But the original movie didn't run away from its charm, right? And it focuses mostly on human characters who are trying to run a failing network show that's losing ratings left and right. Their boss sends them out to find this mythical King Kong monster so they might bring in bigger audiences. Meanwhile, Godzilla has awoken and is trampling cities like, he normally does. And the two monsters are eventually brought together, and it is not a disappointment. The kaiju action is really just really wild, and there's numerous iconic moments and payoffs from both of them. I go back and forth if I enjoy the Japanese version better or the American cut more. The original Japanese version is definitely like the tighter version. It's the superior made version of the movie, hands down, but the American version or the dubbed version is pretty damn funny. So I do kind of feel a little conflicted about that. And now we are finally in the top 10. Next is Invasion of the Astro Monster, aka Monster Zero. We are getting into the portion of the films that are my personal favorites now. And I love the early 1960s Godzilla films, as the top of the list is going to be pretty heavy with them. I say this is another example of the human cast really taking this film to the next level. The monster action feels particularly minimal in this, but you're still very engaged with these lead astronauts who have come face to face with these aliens of Planet X. As the plot unravels, it turns out these aliens have a twisted plan of their own and want Earth for themselves. Like, I know, you really couldn't see that coming. But their scheme is pretty sinister, actually, and what's worse is all their women look just like this, so of course they're going to get whatever they want. But in all seriousness, this movie is a fun and easy watch. Consistently across the board, you have intriguing characters, iconic music from Akira Ifukube, And the climactic scene starring Godzilla, Rodan, and Monster Zero, which is again just King Ghidorah all over again. It features side characters that make the most of their screen time despite being underdogs for most of the movie. Easily one of the more enjoyable films in the franchise. Number 9, GMK, my favorite film of the Millennium series. GMK was released in 2001, was directed by the legendary Shusuke Kaneko, whom was hot off the incredible Gamma trilogy. So you can imagine the hype because this was like bringing Aaron Rodgers to lead the team, right? So did the film meet the expectations? Sort of. GMK introduces more of a fantasy approach to the series. Here, Godzilla is like a dark god possessed by angry spirits of all the soldiers who died uh, during World War II in the South Pacific. And there's also mythological guardian monsters that are, prophesized to stop him. The first half of this movie is terrific, achieving a unique style and tone while pushing the plot in an intriguing manner. The build-up is awesome, and Godzilla's first battle against Baragon fiercely establishes this Godzilla as an incredibly powerful and sadistic monster. The second half of the film, though, loses some of its traction. King Ghidorah doesn't really vibe for me in this, and with him comes some like the shoddier CGI shots in the movie. And the climactic battle with Godzilla and him lack the magnitude you'd expect after watching the 90s Gamma trilogy. Considering that the whole planet is at stake here because this Godzilla is absolutely relentless and evil, you'd hope for a far more grandiose kind of backdrop and better effects work. This Godzilla, though, is easily among my favorite incarnations of the monster himself, and I appreciate Kaneko for taking a radical approach and just making Godzilla so irredeemably evil, imposing, and undeniably cunning. They probably would have worked better if Toho didn't force Kaneko to replace Varan and Anguirus for the more popular Mothra and King Ghidorah combination, because some of the weaker shots of this movie are when the monsters are flying, and honestly, this Ghidorah just looks and feels pretty strange, not really organic or realistic, and it kind of takes you out of film a little bit. Number 8, Godzilla King of the Monsters, 2019. All right, let me explain. As a general moviegoer, I can concede that Godzilla King of the Monsters isn't an exceptionally made film, but as a Godzilla fan, I absolutely love it. Sure, the human cast leaves a lot to be desired, especially considering the talent they attached to this project. Like, it still bums me out that we have had Tywin Lannister in a Godzilla movie and he was so underutilized. I mean, poor Ken Watanabe. He goes from sharing scenes with Tom Cruise and Leonardo DiCaprio to these idiots, but this movie made me stop and appreciate the fact that we were getting a high budget love letter tribute to the series starring other iconic kaiju like Mothra, Rodan, and King Ghidorah. Not only that, but Bear McCreary delivers an exceptional soundtrack that includes several of the classic Godzilla themes brought back to life with his unique style. His Mothra song, for instance, is like pure blissful sex for the ears. The film is packed with Easter eggs and references that fans of the series can have fun with. Furthermore, Rodan's introduction into the film is one of the best scenes in the entire MonsterVerse. And I have to say, I really love how they handled Mothra for such a short amount of screen time. They captured the grace, beauty, and spiritual components of her flawlessly. I'm going to give the number 7 spot to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, 1974. This is the first Godzilla movie I ever watched. The original Mechagodzilla appearance will always hold a special place in my heart. Almost 30 years have gone by since watching this one. I can honestly say that it's still an absolute pleasure to watch. Godzilla is such a badass here. Mechagodzilla is a legendary rival immediately, and King Caesar is one of the most interesting kaiju in the series. I would love to see a backstory done on him, back when he was like the protector of like the Izumi family, and back in ancient times. I just picture it in like feudal Japan. I think that'd be sick. The human characters are all likable, and the knockoff Planet of the Ape aliens are pretty unsettling. I also enjoy that this movie takes place mostly in the outskirts rather than another typical city. It makes a refreshing background for the action scenes. The climactic battle is really a spectacle to behold. It's one of the few movies that I do enjoy more and more as time goes on. Number 6 spot will be Shin Godzilla, perhaps the most controversial Godzilla movie in existence. While it's really wildly popular and successful, those that do not like the movie are really just as vocal about it as the ones that do. A very unique film with a fresh perspective. In some ways, this is a very non-traditional Godzilla film, but in others, it's more like the 1954 original than any other movie that's come since then. Like 1954, it's a real life nuclear disaster that is the catalyst for the on screen events and the cause for Godzilla's carnage. Much like what the original designers in 1954 were going for with their monster, Shin Godzilla's body is also covered in lesions and scarring, has a head that resembles a mushroom cloud. And aside from Godzilla's radical look and earlier stages of his evolution, the common complaint is that the human scenes are too slow and often just feature a bunch of characters in a room not doing much. But it's important to understand the context this film was born in, attacking the inaction of the Japanese government in disaster time. So for me, it was long enough that we waited for a quality Godzilla film with a serious plot and tone, with appropriate acting. Anno throws in enough new tricks that keep the film fresh, and while some of those choices did lead to some backlash, the movie's overall success has to speak for itself. Number five, Godzilla vs. Biollante. This movie's kind of like a hidden gem. I don't feel like enough people have seen it or talk about it. I know there was some issues with the rights and who has them and who's distributing the movie, so it's kind of hard to come by on DVD or something like that. But this really, I mean, the acting in this one is pretty strong across the board. The tone is a good balance of being serious, but a little lighter than it was in 1984. The story is unique, kind of beautiful for a kaiju film. The theme of the film regarding the dangers of genetic experimentation and the arrogance of scientists harken back to the original Gojira, but the real scene stealers are the kaiju themselves. I mean, Godzilla is back and shows up in truly epic fashion. The suit from this film will go on to become one of the most popular Godzilla designs of all time, often being the model used as like the quintessential look in whether it be comics and arts or games or whatever. The new girl, Biollante, is in a league of her own. Both of her forms look realistic and dangerous, a testament to the effects team, but it is Biollante's main form, where she's now fully evolved to look like her cousin Godzilla, that truly is like a sight to behold. I mean, she just really captures like power and elegance, but in a really menacing and incredible design. The final battle between the two kind of does leave a little bit to be desired, but there is enough happening on screen with the other characters that it still results in a satisfactory conclusion. Number four is Godzilla vs. Destroyer. I don't think I've cried as many times doing anything as I did watching this movie as a kid. I remember being like 8 years old when this came out. It was marketed as a film where Godzilla dies, and I just remember being anxious, hoping to get my hands on a copy of the film just so I could watch it and find out the rumors were all bullshit, right? Through my comic book store, my mother was able to get me a bootleg copy of the VHS, which was strictly in Japanese with no subtitles. I didn't understand a lick of it. No idea what was going on, but I really only cared about like the monster parts. So the ending would like tear me up over and over and over again. And for whatever reason, I just kept watching it, trying to decipher something else or what the ending meant. It wasn't until like a while later I had like read on the internet that like it was Godzilla Jr. who was dead in the movie, right? He absorbed all of Godzilla's radiation and evolved into like a full-grown Godzilla himself. But like even today, the scene with Godzilla melting down is beautifully done, but devastating, iconic. At that point, the Heisei series was only ongoing for like 11 years, so the ending as it pertained to Godzilla's death truly made you feel like the character that has been ever present for like the last 40 years was like gone forever. And like we didn't know when he'd come back. In a way, we have Godzilla 98 to thank for that, as it did so terribly that Toho kind of like had to rush into damage control mode and bring back the Japanese Godzilla back into theaters. The movie itself, though, is a nice tribute to the series as a whole, bringing back Emiko from the first Godzilla film in 1954 and having the oxygen destroyer be the source of like this villain's powers. So it felt like it had all come full circle. Burning Godzilla has become perhaps the most popular incarnation of Godzilla himself, and probably certainly the most powerful. Destroyer looked like he was straight out of hell. And while this film has some pacing issues in the middle, the film felt as epic as it should have, right? When it needed to the most. All right, we're in the final three, and kicking us off is a film that many longtime Godzilla fans consider to be the best film in the series. If you want a golden age classic, this has got to be in the discussion. From a monster action standpoint, we get a considerable amount of Godzilla in here, and every bit of it is amazing. From the moment he pops out of the ground in another one of his iconic entrances, to his final battle with the Mothra larva. Godzilla in this is just a straight menace. His new look matches his evil disposition. To contrast this, we have like the divine good, right, in Mothra, who initially has to be persuaded to even come to mankind's aid against Godzilla, because at the heart of this film is a consequential story about corporate greed and the bastardization of the natural world. Akira Ifukube delivers easily one of his best scores on the musical side of things, helping this film sound as epic as it is visually. And like the yin and yang of the two main stars of the movie, Godzilla's themes are full of dread and power, and Mothra's kind of give off this sense of hope and light. So when the two monsters do finally clash, it's surprisingly brutal and erratic. And despite this being made in 1964 with Mothra herself being a prop, the fight sequences aren't too bad on a technical level. They might look a little silly to newcomers of the series, but 1964, especially on the Toho Studios budget, I think it did really well. And I do think after Godzilla's defeat of Mothra, that the film does sort of stall a little bit. So I do think that I wish the film ended a little stronger. But other than that, I mean, it's almost as perfect of a Godzilla movie as you could find. In my number two spot, I'm gonna give it to Gojira, 1954. I really thought this was going to be number one, but I kind of had an epiphany. Um, but 1954's Gojira is a masterclass in filmmaking. It feels epic and haunting from start to finish, and as much as I love the kaiju battles in the series, there is nothing as good as a film that makes you feel the tragedy and devastation of a berserk monster's wrath. Every scene has a strong purpose. Each actor kind of like delivers in convincing fashion. The music is sinister and haunting. The film has like this visual appeal that just has incredible shots and sequences that are simply ahead of its time. Godzilla is horrifying in this. The devastation surely hits too close to home for audiences at the time. Scenes like a crying mother with nowhere to run, holding her two children, as she tells them they'll all be reunited with their father in heaven as Godzilla comes down upon them, is just one of the most impactful things I've ever seen in a film, let alone this particular series. And on top of it, you still understand Dr. Serizawa's confliction about being the man responsible for perhaps creating the next potential weapon of mass destruction, and his reluctance to use it against Godzilla. The film pulls one more trick from its sleeve before the credits roll. Like after all the carnage and misery, how about making the audience sympathize with the monster? As Serizawa and Nagata prep the oxygen destroyer to finally use it against Godzilla, you can see the monster resting peacefully against a rock on like the ocean floor. And when Godzilla does notice the two humans, he approaches them in kind of what appears to be like more of a curious fashion rather than, this vengeful beast on a warpath, like he's acted up all until this time. And he just kind of like steps into like his own grave. And I don't know if audiences back then did feel what I felt, but I definitely felt sorry for him after all that, which is, I think, a testament to the quality of work here. The monster that survived the atom bomb dies in agony as the oxygen in the water is destroyed and all around him, and his massive body just kind of dissolves into nothing. That's true. There's just truly nothing like this movie. All right, number one for my favorite Godzilla movies as of right now, 1964's Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Uh, there is so much to love about this movie. Like, this is peak Showa 60s cinema. I loved both 1956's Rodan as well as 1961's Mothra as solo films. So having them all come together Avengers style, from their individual journeys to eventually unite together against this big new threat, was really rewarding. King Ghidorah was an amazing new monster, and this is the film to watch to see him at his best, at least in the Showa series, if not all the movies. He would later become a bit of a doormat. But the plot here is really fun, and the first time we get to see some sort of alien dimension thrown into the mix, obviously something that would be done several times over in later films. The three monsters get their time to shine, but Godzilla and Rodan really make the wheels go, and it's nice to see Rodan treated with such respect as he goes toe-to-toe with Godzilla on equal terms. And stop me if you've heard this before, but Ifukube once again makes a stellar soundtrack. But why is this my favorite? Well, the film is a great mix of everything I want in a Godzilla movie. It looks great, It sounds great. There's a wonderful balance of some fun character moments, but in a plot that still feels like it has real world consequences. And the monsters all look good. The cinematography is appealing and unique, and you couldn't ask for a more satisfying final battle for this time frame. But also, as great as 1954's Godzilla film was, a film like that couldn't sustain a series, right? Like you would need to eventually change it up. And this was a film that really did that, in my opinion. This like embodies it best. Having Godzilla go from an unstoppable villain that somehow miraculously always gets dumped into like the ocean, to an anti-hero like figure defending his turf was such a smart move for the series and helped to really develop the character of the kaiju star in a way that no other screen monster has ever seen. Because of this film right here, the Godzilla series wasn't just a few films long. Like it transcended generations and has gone on for decades because this really figured out the formula of how to succeed in a long term sense. And I don't think any film really encapsulates it like this. Well, that's going to wrap up my list as it stands right now. I appreciate you guys for watching. Bear with me if this video seems rushed because it is. I'm trying to do this now on the eve of Godzilla Minus One coming out, and my brain is fried. I'm losing my voice because of this video, and I'm still gonna have to edit this somewhat, right? So it kind of looks somewhat presentable. I will definitely, I hope to have a follow-up video regarding Minus One, and I will remark on maybe where it stands now in a list like this. But I also don't want to rush out a ranking. I kind of want to let it marinate a little bit. I'm really looking forward to it though. I keep hearing these amazing things about it, and I'm hoping it's as good as it sounds. So I'll leave you guys with this. 42 minutes, not too shabby. I tried to make it as quickly as possible. I feel like I wrapped through most of this list here. Thank you guys for bearing with me. I'm just trying to keep my mind together at this point. So everybody be safe and peace.